One of the most common issues that Muslims ask about before and during the month of Ramadan is how can I possibly maximize the benefits, the growth, the blessings of the month of Ramadan with an extremely busy lifestyle. So oftentimes, some on the other end of the spectrum will expect that all Muslims should be able to have no worldly obligations during the month of Ramadan. And you cannot realistically expect that 1.5 to 2 billion Muslims have no worldly obligations, no work, no studies, the raising of their children, and so on and so forth, for an entire month. You cannot expect that everyone has control over these circumstances. Rather, it's encouraged for Muslims to take advantage of the month of Ramadan and to maximize, regardless of their busy lifestyles, to maximize their growth and their benefit from Ramadan through certain techniques. And we'll mention, for the sake of time in this video, we'll mention inshallah just one of these techniques. There are many others as well that we'll cover later inshallah. Now, on the basic level, it might seem like common sense, but many people, although they complain that they are extremely busy, although they complain that they have studies, they have work for 8 hours and it takes their energy and their time, there are two issues to look at here. The first is in regards to the perspective. Your work is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it should be. And throughout the series, we will actually be discussing some techniques to help us change massively our perspectives and our intentions, so that the intentions are not just stronger, but they're also magnified. And when they become magnified, you start really thinking of everything that you're doing purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our life and our death, our work, our studies, and our rituals as well. So when we speak about this one technique that we want to incorporate to truly benefit from the month of Ramadan, it is the technique of incorporation. And on the basic level, again, it might seem like common sense to some people, but others will not realize that if you take this technique of incorporation to the advanced level, it becomes something very powerful. It becomes something that transforms your Ramadan if you've never done it before. So at the basic level, what is incorporation? It is to merge the maximum amount, the most possible deeds, into the maximum amount of activities or worldly obligations that someone has. So at the basic level, for example, someone finds that they have 30 minutes of driving to work. They have 30 minutes of lunch break in which they are fasting, and they take advantage of these gaps, if you want to call them gaps, and they recite from the Quran, they take advantage and make dhikr, they make dua. So they use these gaps in the wisest way possible throughout the month of Ramadan. But on the next level, if you want to take things deeper and really start to maximize your Ramadan, at the advanced level, this idea of incorporation requires planning in advance. It requires a high level of sincerity and motivation to truly want to maximize your Ramadan. And then it requires assessing everything that you have and implementing properly. How does this work? For example, you don't just look for the gaps in your schedule, but rather you begin, and you can take this as an activity, if you will. You begin by assessing exactly what you have during the month of Ramadan. And many people don't realize that there are things they can shift around. There are things that could be, for example, postponed or done in a more efficient way. But a lot of times, many people don't benefit and don't maximize their growth because all of these thoughts and wishes and desires to maximize the month of Ramadan are all in their minds. And they're not really doing anything with regards to proper planning, efficiency, and implementation. Now, it might seem strange to some people to have to sit down and plan out their Ramadan. But if you really want to benefit from the month of Ramadan, why not plan ahead? Especially if you feel that you are a busy Muslim, and almost everyone is, especially if you feel that you have many obligations, or if you feel like you can definitely take things to the next level, and you haven't really pushed yourself in previous years to maximize the benefit from the month of Ramadan. So begin by assessing everything that you have. So someone might say, for example, they have 6 hours of studies at the university. They cannot possibly postpone these courses for another semester. A mother is raising her children, a father is raising his children. They cannot postpone raising their children to another time. Someone who's working 8 hours a day and they're driving 30 minutes to work and 30 minutes back, you cannot expect them to necessarily have control over their work or their jobs, especially as minorities in Western countries. Muslims do not really have an entire society that is also fasting, that is also understanding of their situation, in that they would give them more flexibility. But there are cases like this. So generally speaking, you want to take the initiative, you want to take action by planning in advance what actions or demands or obligations you have throughout the month of Ramadan. The next step after that is to assess the basics, which is find all the gaps in your schedule in which you could do something extra with a ritual. For example, if you have the 30-minute break at lunch or during work time or between two university classes, you can take advantage and recite some Quran. You can take advantage, make some dua. You can study a verse of the Quran, an ayah of the Quran. So you find all of these gaps, and it might seem, again, strange to some people. But if you really want to maximize your growth and you feel like you need a guide as a busy Muslim for the month of Ramadan, then try this activity out and see how it works for you, inshallah. And all of this is being mentioned in advance before Ramadan. Why? Because we want to plan ahead. So this month, the month of Shaban, was referred to as the month of the reciters, Shahrul Qurra. Why? Because many of the companions would increase in the recitation of the Quran before Ramadan came around. The Prophet ﷺ, as Aisha radiallahu anha reported, he used to fast more in the month of Shaban than any other month, meaning any other voluntary month. Why? Because they were training themselves and their nafs and their souls and their spirituality and their bodies. They're training themselves and preparing themselves for the greatest of months to come. So if you really want to take advantage of Ramadan, then try to focus on these techniques, on this planning, on this efficiency, and you will notice that with your planning, inshallah, with this effort and sincerity, you'll notice more of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life because you are taking the initiative. So the second step, as we mentioned, start assessing all of the gaps in your schedule. So again, driving to work, you have a break, you have some time between classes. Someone who's working, for example, at the hospital has time as they're walking around. So you have these small gaps that you might think are insignificant, 1 to 2 minutes here and there. But the reality is these gaps or waiting times can be maximized, and they have been maximized by many people. For example, a brother last year said he was trying to maximize every single minute possible. So it wasn't just about a 30-minute break. He wanted every single minute of Ramadan to be taken advantage of. So what he did was he had the Quran app on his smartphone, and he would basically look around at any moment and find a minute here, a minute there, would recite some Quran, and he found that during the day, by the end of the day, he had completed an entire juz. Now, throughout the 30 days, he was able to complete the Quran more than once, only because he took advantage and kept looking for more opportunities to recite more and more of the Quran during as many times as possible. So don't consider a minute or two to be insignificant. The clock is running during the month of Ramadan and afterwards and before as well. And as the clock is counting down and your hours for the month of Ramadan are running out, you want to be very insistent and persistent and active and aggressive in trying to maximize as many minutes as possible. The third step with regards to incorporation at the advanced stage is not just to incorporate for the month of Ramadan, and not just to incorporate by looking at the gaps that you have, but look at the actual demands and obligations. So for example, if someone is working and their work has a lot of walking time in which they're just not speaking to anyone, they find that they can incorporate into that habit or that work some type of dhikr, remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So throughout the day, this sister, for example, last year, is making istighfar. She's asking Allah, oh Allah, forgive me. As she's working and she's a nurse at the hospital, she's walking around making istighfar. She noticed that this incorporation, which was not just during a break but during the work itself, This incorporation and this technique that we're referring to, she took it so seriously to heart that after the month of Ramadan, it remained with her. Throughout the year, she's making istighfar, she's able to make dhikr, she's able to do this while dealing with her worldly obligations because she incorporated this properly and at an advanced stage during the month of Ramadan. There are many other techniques, there are many other things that we can do to shift our perspectives. There are some specific activities that we can follow properly, but ultimately it requires not just sincerity, it requires not just wishing for a better Ramadan, but it requires taking the initiative. Any opportunity that comes to you that allows you to grow or to learn more about how to prepare and maximize your Ramadan, how to incorporate the maximum amount of good deeds into the maximum amount of obligations, we should take advantage of that. And that is, inshallah, a sign of sincerity. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us truly amongst those who maximize their time and productivity and growth in the month of Ramadan. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us, regardless of how busy we are, of those who are accepted and forgiven during the month of Ramadan and throughout the rest of the year.